Welcome to the boardroom. My name is Trevor Lutz. I'm the president and CEO of Sandcastle Community Management. Based in Naples, we're a homeowner and condominium association management company. Every week we bring you the boardroom and bring you esteemed guests to talk about various topics that deal with homeowners and condominium associations. And today is no different. Today we're delighted to have Consult Engineering, Inc., Joshua Porter, the president of the company, with us today. Welcome, Josh.
Thank you for having me, Trevor.
And we've got a great topic, and actually a topic that's pretty in-depth, so we're going to need to, I know this is one that I'm going to need to focus on, because I'm not an engineer by trade, certainly, but we're talking about water intrusion and understanding the envelope of your building, and that's really important, obviously, with condominiums. And let's talk a little bit about, first of all, what is the envelope of the building?
The envelope of the building is basically the physical portion of the building that separates the exterior environment from the interior environment. So the environment that we all like to sit in and watch TV in and is air conditioned, that's our nice interior environment. And then obviously where the weather happens, that's the exterior environment. What a lot of people fail to realize about the building envelope is it's not the paint and the windows. It is actually the full physical assembly of the building. So you're talking, from the interior paint and drywall, to the furring strips, to the physical wall, all the way out to the final, stucco, if it's a stucco building, and the exterior paint. It also includes items like windows, doors, sliders, the roof, all the roof assembly portions. So it's really everything around the building that keeps the outside from getting in.
That protects essentially what you've purchased, which is the indoor airspace.
You got it.
And of course, the biggest enemy of that indoor airspace is probably water penetration.
Yep. Yeah.
And so talk a little bit about, water intrusion. Exactly, it's self-explanatory, but tell us a little bit about what type of water intrusion we're going to be talking about.
Water intrusion, I think, is probably, as far as the term is concerned, it's one of the most misunderstood things about the building sciences. A lot of people view water intrusion as, well, I came home into my unit and I stepped in and my feet were sloshing on the carpet. Sure. And it's a little bit more in depth than that. And it's also to be distinguished between a regular leak, a plumbing leak versus water intrusion. Given that definition of the building envelope, water intrusion isn't just water that actually gets from the exterior environment and enters the interior environment, but it's also water that actually just simply enters the building envelope. The building envelope contains a lot of things like structural columns and beams, and a lot of the structural integrity of the building is inside the building envelope. So we also don't want water just simply getting in the envelope. It's not enough that you come home and the house is dry, or the unit is dry in a condominium, but is the actual building envelope itself dry inside of its assemblage as well.
And so you could have a hidden problem and not know it.
Basically, yeah. And a lot of times especially in Florida and especially in coastal construction, a lot of times the structure itself will begin to break down and will begin to, the steel inside the reinforcement will begin to expand and it will break the concrete. And you'll actually see that the building is providing physical evidence on the outside of the structure that it's dealing with water intrusion and it's causing damage, and every unit inside the building might be dry still.
Now you've talked about what the building envelope is. Tell us, why is it important for the association to learn or understand about water intrusion?
Water intrusion is it's a massive industry. Our service area for Consult Engineering is primarily focused in Southwest Florida. And in Southwest Florida, when you consider roofing projects, building restoration projects, painting projects, and all these projects that condominium and homeowner associations undertake each year, when you add all that up, and not counting legal fees and engineering fees and all these other things, you're looking at contracting costs somewhere in the range of $250 to $500 million a year just in Southwest Florida. Wow. So it's a massive industry, and a lot of times you can find that associations are actually spending money in the incorrect way. So that $250 million or $500 million that's being spent each year is sometimes not being spent in the best way.
So they may be hiding the problem or exasperating the problem.
Absolutely. A good example of that actually is approximately 15 to 20 years ago, even as recent as 10 years ago, there were a lot of manufacturers going around and selling elastomeric paints that we were putting on buildings. And the idea was, well, if elastomeric waterproofing works so well on concrete decks, and we use it on roofs, and we use it as a caulking, and we use it, why not just cover the whole building in this wonderful, beautiful product, and then all your water intrusion problems will go away forever. And it was literally pitched like this. And what we find is, they spent a little bit more, but they were convinced, okay, well, we'll spend 10% more on this painting project, and we'll never have to deal with this issue again, this water intrusion issue. And what we've discovered, and what has now become a big problem is nowadays we're finding that these membranes that were put on 10, 15, 20 years ago, water is still getting into the building envelope, but now it can't get out.
And so you're not seeing the damage occurring.
And you're not seeing the damage occurring. It actually conceals and hides a lot of the concrete damage and the stucco damage. And so then what we're having to do is, we're actually helping an association right now to bid out a project, and they're dealing with this very issue. And we're recommending to them that they actually strip the entire building and get this elastomeric paint off.
Wow.
The paint manufacturer won't provide a warranty for new paint onto the building because it's actively failing, and most contractors don't want to touch it. So, if you don't strip the building, and then now you're talking way more cost than if you had just stuck with the original plan to begin with.
Sure. Well, today you're sitting in the boardroom. My name is Trevor Lutz, and we're sitting with Consult Engineering Joshua Porter. And Joshua, tell us a little bit about your company and give us a flavor of what the focus is of your firm.
Sure. Consult Engineering was founded about 3.5 years ago. When we started the company, we really wanted to fill a niche in the industry that was not being filled, and that is particular conducting engineering services from the perspective of an owner representative. We feel like a lot of the engineering firms, and the engineering firm that I had worked at previously, we were really engineering firms, and we were intended to provide good engineering solutions for our clients.
Sure.
But beyond that, when situations would arise, or when the schedule wouldn't go right during a project, it was kind of like, well, hey, we're just the engineering firm.
Right.
And I thought, well, I want to be able to answer that question in a different way, and not just say, well, we're just an engineering firm. So everything we do is kind of, the way I say it is we're owner representatives first, and we're engineers second.
So you're there to support the board.
Absolutely. And support their interests. We don't work with, we don't particularly work usually with contractors. We don't work with developers. We don't work with contractors that do new construction. We specifically work with condo homeowner associations and condo boards.
Excellent. How do people get a hold of you if they think they have a need, or they're working on a large project? Or
yeah, our phone number is 941-206-3000, and our website is consultengineering.com. And you can get a hold of us pretty much at any time. We're out of the most of our staff is we're out servicing condo and homeowner associations.
Sure.
So a lot of times we're out of the office, but they can just pipe you right through to us.
So if an association has a large project they're working on, let's say it's not a problem, but they're getting ready to do a large project, maybe a re-roof or a large painting or stucco repair, they should probably call you ahead of time before they actually start meeting with contractors.
That's what we always recommend. I mean, either way, the fee for the engineer is really minuscule usually compared to the overall project cost. And the earlier we're involved in the project,
Sure.
the better. Absolutely.
Sure. Now we're talking about the building envelope and understanding the envelope of the building, and you've described that as really the protective coating essentially around what each owner's purchased, their condominium unit. A lot of times, water intrusion is probably the biggest problem into a building, but there's some areas where it may not truly be water intrusion. It may be something else.
Yeah, that's for sure. And going back to that example of, somebody coming home and you step into a pool of water
Sure.
into your unit, a lot of these things can be caused, by leaking water lines. You might have a broken waste pipe in the waste stack. You might even just have plumbing or effluent back up into the
Right.
house. None of these are really considered water intrusion. We've even had a lot of associations that have had water heater tanks that have failed. And when the building was older, these tanks didn't have pans, they didn't have drains. So even when they failed, they basically just flooded the unit, especially if you were up north. A lot of these things are all just other types of leaks, because you want to go back to that definition of the building envelope, and that is the separator between the exterior environment and the interior environment.
Right.
These plumbing leaks and things like that are basically problems, and they're serious problems,
Right.
but they're problems within the building envelope. They're within the building, I should say. sometimes we also find that people don't understand what they're looking at when they're looking inside their units. We have two examples. One is the water accumulation that can occur on the inside of windows during the winter.
It's very common right now.
Yeah, a lot of new construction, the buildings are sealed so tight to prevent any kind of cool air from leaking out of the unit and wasting money.
Right.
We're all about energy efficiency, but what happens is that none of this humidity can normalize with the exterior environment as well. So a lot of times in the winter, you'll find that the glass is cold and the high humidity that we capture here in Florida is in our units, and it gathers on the window, and this can actually run down and rot out the sills. And again, it looks kind of like my window's leaking. This is water intrusion.
Sure.
But it's really not. We had one association that actually was very proactive. They have an on-site property manager, and the board equipped her with a moisture detector, and it was this long rod, and you can put it into the ground and you can detect if the unit's wet. Well, it doesn't have any kind of percentage readings or anything like that. It just beeps real loud.
It's either wet or dry.
Right. That's the thought process behind using it. So we were called out to the building, and because this one unit was everywhere we put this thing was beeping. So I went up there with the property manager, and we tested it, and we found that actually none of the room was actually had any water intrusion. It's just that the relative humidity inside the unit was so high that anywhere you touched this thing, it was reading that it was wet.
Right. Well, that sounds like Southwest Florida.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, you're sitting in the boardroom. My name's Trevor Lutz, and we're sitting with Joshua Porter from Consult Engineering, and we're talking about understanding the building envelope. And we're going to be getting a little more in depth on preventive measures need to be taken and how to identify potential problems in your building's envelope right here on the boardroom. And welcome back to the boardroom. My name is Trevor Lutz. Every Saturday, sitting here with you in the boardroom with a guest that is speaking about issues that matter to condominiums and HOAs, and today's no different. We're talking to Josh Porter from Consult Engineering. Thank you, Josh, for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
We're talking about the building envelope, and we're primarily talking about condominiums, but this really has to do with single-family homes as well.
Absolutely.
And we were talking about what isn't considered water intrusion, and we talked a little bit about leaking water lines and broken waste pipes and plumbing backups, and those are all serious problems, but that's not the type of water intrusion we're talking about. Let's talk a little bit about how does actual water intrusion occur that you're out there investigating.
Okay. The water intrusion is really, as we kind of scratched the surface of, a very complex issue. But the cause of it is really quite simple. It's rainfall. I mean, when it rains outside, we want to keep that rain out. We want to keep it out of our building. We want to keep it out of our walls. So really what this boils down to is water intrusion is when something in the building envelope fails to keep that rainfall out. The building envelope can fail in a couple ways. For newer buildings, we find and we define them kind of as possible defects in the construction. So there can be a design defect, whether that has to do with the way the window is designed, the way the stucco or cladding system is designed, the way the waterproofing is designed. The other items that we find a lot of times in newer construction, single-family homes, things like that, are mostly workmanship defects. The architect designed the window and the way it should go in and designed all the flashing correctly, but it was not built that way.
Sure.
And it was not installed correctly.
And that probably really was common during the boom in the housing market too, wasn't it?
Oh, very much so.
They were slapping houses up as quickly as they could.
Yeah, and I think, it really goes back to something I often sit down with associations and have to explain to them that the mindset behind new construction is completely different than the mindset behind existing building maintenance and repair, which is more, in the industry category that I'm in. And I know because I came from new construction engineering. I did that for years. And a lot of times, we would have a plan and I would structurally design the whole building. And we knew, that the slab needed to be protected or the building needed to be protected from waterproofing. But a lot of times, engineers and architects, we just put the word on there, waterproofing by others, and we just point to it with an arrow in general, and and that's it for the plans, and that's our extent of detailing.
You hoped it happened,
right? You hoped that, and we said, well, that's on the contractor to make sure that's what I put it on the plan that it should be waterproofed. I didn't inspect the product or how it should be waterproofed or how it details, and you're not required to. And even today, you're not required to. So this is why we have a major breakdown between new construction and people who work in existing industry. And a lot of times when you do like developer transitions and things of that nature, it's very hard getting the two parties to talk to each other because the contractor or developer takes the position that, well, I built it like I was supposed to, and I built it the way we do it in the industry. And the question is, but it leaks. It still comes in. Sure. There's still water intruding into my building envelope. The other cause of water intrusion into the building and into the building envelope is really just simply due to the age of the building.
Sure.
The sealants start failing. The windows get older, and those details start failing. The waterproofing on decks and balconies start failing. For single-family residential homes, a lot of single-family residential homes in homeowner associations have tile roofs, for example. Sure. But even if they have shingle roofs, a lot of people don't realize that the tile and the shingle, all these devices that are installed on top of their roof, are what we call shedding devices. They're there to simply shed the majority of the water. But there's an underlayment under that, and that's what is truly your last stop to protect your interior on a single-family residential from water getting in. And that has a finite age. And as it gets to the end of its useful life, then all of a sudden people with a perfectly good-looking tile roof that we've had it cleaned every year and we've had it repaired and it looks beautiful, they're getting leaks all over the place. Well, that's because the underlayment's completely shot.
Sure. Very rarely do associations replace their roof because they're tired of looking at the tile.
Correct.
It's because they're leaking, even though they may still look good.
Correct, yeah.
And probably you're talking about a combination of these two items, too. You talked about poor workmanship and then age, and we're now probably in that sweet spot here in Southwest Florida where we're getting a combination of the two. You've got buildings that are 5 to 7 years old, and so they're starting to age, and on top of the poor workmanship, it's probably exacerbating the problem.
You're exactly right. We have a client in Fort Myers, North Fort Myers, actually, and they have in that exact situation. There is construction defects. Stucco was put on wrong. The windows were detailed incorrectly. The sills were built wrong. But then you combine that with the fact that all the caulking they used is now also failing. And so what happens is you have an age-related issue that has allowed water to intrude into the building envelope, and then the construction defects just simply allow it to expand and into a much bigger situation than it should have ever gotten to.
Sure. And hopefully they identify that before it causes true damage, because as you talked about, water intrusion isn't always obvious to the boards or to the association.
Correct. Yeah. And there are some very obscure kind of ways that water can intrude into a building envelope, and nobody will ever really know, and it will never get caught until it becomes a big problem. And
great. You give us something to worry about. So tell what should we be looking for?
Some of these not so obvious examples would be in roofs. So like take a condo building with a flat roof. When you have water that has gotten under the roofing membrane, but it hasn't leaked into somebody's unit, hasn't gotten into their environmental space, you have a situation where the roof might have start getting these vapor bubbles under the membrane, and so what happens is you have your roofing contractor who hopefully you're on contract with a roofing contractor who comes out and does maintenance every year, and he'll come out and he'll cut these bubbles and he'll patch them up, and the problem though is still that you have this water in there, and water is actively getting in there. So and a lot of times that issue isn't addressed. How is this water getting in there? And it may never turn into a leak into somebody's unit or a water intrusion that actually enters the interior environment. But what it will end up doing is it will end up affecting the overall useful life of that roof. You thought you bought a 20 or 25 year roof, and you end up finally hiring a consultant after the repair fees get so high, and the consultant comes out and says, well, you've got about 50, you're on year 14, you've got 1 year left, and this thing has to be replaced.
I've walked on a number of roofs where you're walking along and you'll hit a spot and it starts squishing.
Yeah.
And you've got water trapped under the roof, and it hasn't penetrated obviously the entire envelope, but it's a potential problem.
Yeah, and a lot of people do not identify that. Roofing contractors don't identify that as a water intrusion issue.
Because it's not leaking into the unit yet.
Right, yeah. And so it's not a big concern. Nobody's worried about it, but they don't really realize that it affects the useful life of that element. And roofs are big dollars, for example, the only way you can detect that, and it won't be detected during your yearly inspections, by the contractor. The only way you can detect that is really using, other technologies like infrared thermal imaging and things of that nature. And you've got to know how to do that and when to use it, and that there's certain times of day that will actually reveal it. And there's other times of day that it won't, for example. Windows also are another issue that a lot of people don't realize. People say, well, we're getting leaks around the windows in our high-rise condo, but good thing we're doing a painting project this year, so let's just make sure we have all the caulking cut out and put in the building painted. And a lot of times what they fail to realize or they don't have it assessed properly is the sealants that are internal to the window or have those reached the end of their useful life? Do the windows need to be what we call wet glazed, where we basically seal up all the joints of the metal to metal joints, and how is the caulking between the glass and the metal, and things of those nature, that we have to ask.
And if they don't identify that before they do that big painting job, they're going to paint right over that problem and probably seal up the issue, and so it'll be hidden.
Yeah,
but it's still there
for sure. Yeah, and the other question too with windows is, how do they weep? How do they drain? If they're designed to weep and drain, a lot of windows nowadays, especially on newer construction, are not. And these contractors are installing windows that are designed to resist the water from ever getting into the assembly. So then if you put a nice caulking joint around the whole window, then yeah, you could definitely be trapping it into the system. The other item that people need to understand about walls, the wall on your single-family residential, the wall in your low-rise condominium, your townhouse, your high-rise. It doesn't matter. In Florida, we use two typical construction types. And the one is stucco on masonry, and the other construction type is metal lath and stucco on frame.
Okay.
Now, what people don't realize is they think that paint is basically a waterproofing, and it really isn't. Paint has what we call a perm rating, or a permeability factor. So it allows water to go in and out of it. That's what it's designed to do. So the stucco is actually designed to absorb water and take water into itself.
Interesting.
And then when the rainfall stops and when the rain event ends, then the wall is designed to basically release that moisture as vapor. And there are two systems for that. The stucco on masonry is considered a mass wall unit. So it's actually designed to store a certain mass of water. So water penetrates into the stucco. It can even penetrate into the masonry a little bit. This is not actually water intrusion. This is the way the building was intended to function. And then when the rain event ends after a couple of days, then the stucco and the masonry dry out. Stucco, which is installed on top of wood frame walls,
right?
Okay, that's using a product that we call paper-backed lath, and the paper, kind of like the underlayment on a roof, is your last stop. So the stucco is going to take in water, but it hits that paper and it runs down the building and it weeps out the bottom of the wall. Well, a lot of people don't really understand, and a lot of contractors don't even understand that actually that underlayment behind that stucco has a finite life. If you have a building, townhouse, single-family residential that is of frame construction, and you've got this metal lath and stucco on your building, there will come a time when it all needs to come off.
Now, whether the stucco then could look good still, it still could be painted, but the lath on the back could fail?
It's not even so much the lath, it's actually the paper even behind the lath. So there's a paper separator, a water barrier, if you will, between the lath and stucco. So yes, absolutely, the stucco can look very, very good, but once that paper becomes deteriorated enough, the water will penetrate through and it will start leaking into people's units through the wall.
And I presume there's a way to identify that as it's failing, or to identify it before it truly fails?
And basically it requires disassembly. I mean, you have to disassemble and test certain areas of the stucco. And so once your building reaches a certain age, then you want to start engaging professional help from architects and engineers to come out and say, should we start doing this testing and should we start looking at this?
And speaking of professional help, we're sitting with Consult Engineering, Josh Porter. He's the president of Consult Engineering, and we're going to be picking this topic up. Very interesting, probably a little concerning. A lot of people out there nervous now about their stucco. You're listening to The Boardroom. And welcome back to The Boardroom. My name is Trevor Lutz. Today we're sitting with Consult Engineering, Josh Porter. We're talking about the building envelope, and this is a sort of a fascinating topic because it's something we probably don't think about. At least I think about sort of superficially, but we're talking about water penetration and how to identify it and how to combat it, and obviously we're talking about millions and millions of dollars worth of real estate that depend on having a tight envelope. And we started talking about water penetration, specific areas where water penetration can come in. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Some of the specific locations we touched a base on a little bit, and I'll reiterate them. Definitely the roof is a big source of water intrusion. This can cost a lot of money, especially in a hurricane event, where you basically could possibly lose a chunk of your roof, and then you have a lot of water intruding then into the building. around windows and doors. We call these, and other penetrations. But even from a technical standpoint, a window and a door are really considered penetrations because they're holes in the wall, and then you stick a window or door into that hole.
Right.
So penetrations through the building, such as windows, doors, pipes, things of that nature. Cracks in the facade, specifically talking mostly about stucco facades, since that's most of what's in Florida. Also, we touched a little bit on failed sealants, but in a lot of cases, you can also find that sealants are improperly installed, or they're not the right product. If you don't specify during your painting project that you want all of the old sealants cut out and removed, you'll sometimes receive bids where they are literally just putting new sealant on top of old, and the new sealant will fail within a couple years, but it looks real good when they walk off the job site. You can also have improperly designed or built waterproofing. Waterproofing, particularly if we're talking mid-rises and high-rises, or even two-story townhouses and things of that nature that have a concrete deck. You can find that a lot of times you'll spend a lot of money to waterproof those decks, but you don't put in place a plan for how should tile be installed on top of this waterproofing.
Right.
And I have walked on a lot of buildings where they've spent a lot of money to put waterproofing membranes on, and then people were just allowed to hire, whatever tile company they wanted. And some tile companies know how to do it, and some tile companies don't.
Sure.
And so the tile company will come in and he'll say, well, there's this big curve around this, on this waterproofing, and I can't get my tile up close to the wall, so I'm just going to cut it, or and these types of things. And they'll grout the whole system in. Or another big problem is they don't use the right mastic, if you will, or bonding agent between the tile and the waterproofing membrane. And if you don't use the proper thin set, then basically the tile will fail within a couple years, and then you end up with this dispute between the homeowner and the condo board. And so it's much better if you go ahead and adopt some sort of tile specification, and then that way the waterproofing membrane is properly protected and you can get the full life out of it. The other thing people are not told is when they have waterproofing membranes installed and when they have caulking installed on the building, they're not told about the useful life of these products. And they don't realize that there's a maintenance expense. So if you have a building with elevated walkways, or I should say exterior exposed walkways, you want to make sure that those walkways stay waterproof so that you don't have water intruding into the structure of the walkway. And a lot of people are not told that, well, once you do let's say if you're using like a two-part urethane waterproofing membrane, which is pretty much the most common in the industry, that top coat needs to be reapplied every 5 years. You don't reapply the top coat every 5 years, and the sun actually can finally get its way down into the base coat, you'll destroy the base coat and you won't get the full useful life out of the waterproofing membrane. And it's a very small expense to do that, but most people aren't told. And then the other source of water intrusion into buildings, which is probably the least common in Florida, because we're pretty good about building above the water table, but occasionally you'll find parking garages and things of that are under a building, and the grade is built up around the base floor of the parking garage, and you'll find that water intrudes through the floor. It can come up through the floor and it can come through the wall and things of that nature. And so those solutions are kind of a bear of their own to deal with.
Now, one of the things I find fascinating about your company, Consult Engineering, and again, we're talking with Josh Porter today, is that you're there as an advocate almost for the association to help them identify potential pitfalls before they do large projects, or to maintain their buildings properly.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the one of the worst uses of a consultant's services is to actually hire us after you've already chosen your contractor and you've signed a contract. I remember on one of the previous boardroom shows, one of the attorneys talking about a similar situation. That's not the right time to call the attorney after you've signed a contract.
Exactly.
Same thing with the consultants. You really want to bring us in from the very ground floor so that we can establish apples to apples bidding process and things of this nature. And that harkens back to what our business is all about, what Consult Engineering is all about, being that owner rep and making sure that you're getting the right plan for your building and walking you through the process from start to finish.
And a great example that you touched on before is, the failed sealants. And a lot of times you see contractors simply just sealing right over the old sealant and doing a disservice to association because that's going to break down quicker.
Absolutely.
And those are the kind of things you can identify in advance if you're brought in early into the game.
Right. And there's actually a project that we were called in, another project that we were kind of called in on the tail end. We weren't brought in to design the solution. And that's kind of a phrase I use a lot is you really want to use a consultant, an architect, or an engineer who's going to design the solution and not just monitor the progress of the work.
Exactly.
But we're brought in, and we were brought in to monitor the project, the progress of the work after the fact, and this happens. And so we're out there on the site, and they're having all of the caulking replaced around the windows on the building. And so we get out there, and we go up on the stage, and we get on the side of the building, and we realize, well, actually, all the stucco's bad around the windows. So, is it helping what they're doing? Yes. Is it the solution? No. It was like part of the solution. And then actually to fix the stucco, you're going to have to tear out all the water, all the caulking anyway. So.
Wow. Now, if people want to get a hold of you for a project to look at, or if they need your assistance in some way, how do they do that?
They can call our office at 941-206-3000. You can catch us on the internet at consultengineering.com. And you can also email us at office@consultengineering.com.
Excellent. Well, we talked about during the last segment, I found this interesting, is the failure of stucco, and that and often one type of stucco can fail on the back end of it without you even realizing it's happening.
Correct. Yeah. Stucco is one of those issues that is very misunderstood even by consultants in the industry. Once you understand that stucco actually is designed to take in water, then you can kind of understand how the system is supposed to work. Some of the real obvious things that associations and maintenance staff and property managers have no problem identifying is, from doing a walk around the house or building, is cracks in the stucco.
Sure.
And, we said, with that understanding of, well, isn't stucco supposed to take on water? That's no big deal. Well, the problem is when you have a crack in a stucco, it allows too much water into the system. So we're talking about like a stucco on masonry. It's a mass storage wall. It's designed to store a certain mass of water. Well, when you have a crack in the stucco, too much water gets into the wall in too short of a time. And then you end up with an overloaded situation, and the water actually will overload that wall, overload that assembly, and actually end up inside the unit. So cracks in stucco are a big one. And they're a more obvious one. The other problem, which is a little less obvious, is what we call debonded stucco. So it's stucco that has literally become detached from the masonry substrate. Sometimes when it detaches, it cracks as well. And so therefore, then it's kind of easy still to identify because you've got those telltale signs. If you've got a building, though, like we have one building that we're working on right now that actually has the elastomeric paint. This is the building we're recommending that they strip the paint off of the building. Well, we can't find any visible cracks on the stucco.
Oh.
And we know the stucco is bad, though. So we know there's issues with the stucco because eventually you'll find these big blister water bubbles on the side of the building where the water has taken in too much, where the building has taken in too much water,
right.
And the elastomeric paint won't let it out, and so you've got these big, huge water blisters on the side of the building. What happens with debonded stucco is you actually end up with a void, an airspace between the stucco and the wall. So even if the wall doesn't have any cracks,
right,
and it's taking in moisture through the paint as a normal course of how the building's supposed to work, if you have these voids, then these voids can basically fill up with water. And what the voids do is they can contribute to additional water intrusion into the actual interior space because they will overload that area of the wall system. The other thing that they'll do is that once you start having delaminated stucco or debonded stucco and you have these voids and the water can get in there, the water will actually start separating the rest of the stucco around it, and it will actually make the problem grow much faster very quickly.
Great. Something to look forward to. We're talking with Josh Porter from Consult Engineering. One of the things that you mentioned early on is, we're talking about the building envelope. You're trying to deflect the water and the moisture from the building. And so one of the common questions we hear from our boards is, gutters versus no gutters. A lot of people from up north are used to having gutters on their buildings. What's the right answer?
That's tough to answer in one question. Gutters serve really two purposes here in Florida, and the one purpose is to prevent any kind of washout from the foundation of the building. I just went and looked at a church about 2 months ago, and it didn't have any gutters. And on one side, the roof had a mono pitch, so all the water pitched to one side of the sanctuary. And where the water hit the soil, the soil had been eroded away from the foundation almost 6 to 8 inches, and nobody had gone out there to do anything about it or maintenance or anything.
Sure.
Well, then what happened was, without this good soil around the foundation and the footing, the foundation starts to sink. And then there was cracks all in the wall. So that's one of those things, kind of funny that we're talking about cracks in stucco previously, because it's one of those things I was called out because there was cracks in the stucco.
Right.
And it ended up being a foundational issue. And I said, well, you should have had gutters on this building, to begin with. So gutters serve that purpose of really preventing foundational issues to the building. And then they also protect the landscaping, and for buildings that have more complex design, buildings with sidewalks, things like that, a properly designed gutter system, especially gutters that direct water to a collection system under the grade, as opposed to just dumping it right onto the sidewalk, are very important, in that they be designed and implemented correctly.
Excellent. Well, you're sitting with Josh Porter here in the boardroom today, and we're talking about the building envelope, and this is certainly important for condominiums or homeowner associations. We're going to be picking up this topic, and we're going to be talking about how to identify the problems and correct them in the next segment. Stay tuned. And welcome back to the boardroom. My name's Trevor Lutz. We're sitting today with Josh Porter from Consult Engineering, and we're talking about understanding the building envelope. In other words, the protective coating around the association's asset. And we've been talking about water penetration, which is a little scary, and we had some good information last segment. Let's carry on and talk about, once the water intrusion problem is identified, what do we do about it? How do we take care of it?
Sure. And it's kind of funny that you say once it's been identified, because in my experience, it's going to happen.
Right.
Especially when you start dealing with mid-rise and high-rise buildings, there's just so much surface area. There's so much to deal with that it's going to happen. So what's the proper process, or what should we do? As an association, I cannot express this enough, to document everything. My job, once I am eventually called out, is so much easier when the association has records of which units were done. I'm working with one association. They actually have drawings of the building and highlights and notes. I mean, it's very thorough documentation. But document everything along the line. And I'm sure the attorney, and the attorneys would also say the same things.
Sure.
Because it helps out if it ever turns into a legal issue for them. The water intrusion that is identified, that has already happened, can be broken down really into two kind of categories. One is the major issues. Okay, this is when the roof has sprung a leak and the water has intruded into the unit, and you are walking into a sloshing carpeted. You need to get somebody out there. You have kind of that fiduciary responsibility to make sure that gets addressed, and that a contractor gets out there to start getting that water vacuumed out, maybe remove the carpet if necessary, and to start drying out the unit. And that really goes for any type of water intrusion. Water intrusion around storm shutters, water intrusion around windows, doors, anything like that.
Sure.
You start getting major water intrusion, I would recommend probably your first call be to somebody who can get out there and start addressing the problem. Your immediate second call should probably be your attorney and your architect or engineer. So what we want to do is we want to be involved in the process early on. A lot of times, what a fire and water intrusion type contractors, these guys who deal mostly with insurance and things like that, what these contractors are very good at doing is getting the water out, mitigating the damage, reducing the amount of damage that's going to be occurring, and then also usually plugging the hole.
Sure.
Talking about that roof leak example, they're very good at making sure a roofer gets out there that day and gets up there, finds the hole, and plugs it, kind of situation. What I recommend against is having them prepare the full solution of how to fix it. And the question then, becomes, well, we have this leak and it's coming in here. What should we do to stop that from happening in the future and stuff? So when you've got that leak coming in, I would definitely say that you would rely on the expertise of an architect or engineer who specializes in existing buildings and existing building envelope sciences to really find out, okay, what caused this? I mean, if it's obvious, somebody threw a rock into a window and the window was broken, and then a big heavy rainstorm blew water into the unit. That is a water intrusion issue, but it's so blatantly obvious you probably don't need expert help. And I'll be the first to say that. But there's a lot of times, especially when you have water coming in around these storm shutters. People install these storm shutters. And I'll give you an example. They install the storm shutters around windows and doors. You know the type they roll down, and sometimes they have a cranking arm that goes.
Very common.
Yeah, very, very common. And they're good systems. The cranking arm that goes through the wall, though, and what they'll do is they'll caulk all around the tops and the sides of the shutter hood, so that you're thinking, okay, good. Now we've stopped water because I've drilled a big hole right through the building where the arm goes to the shutter, so that I can crank it open and closed. But when you go back to what we talked about before, how stucco buildings are actually designed to take in water.
Right.
Now you realize that the caulking around the shutter really isn't that useful, and water's in the wall anyway, and now it just found a big hole right through the wall, and I see this all the time where water's coming in through those. So those penetrations are supposed to be properly filled and sealed.
And the contractor, of course, thinks he's doing the right thing. He's filling the hole that he caused, but he's not realizing how the envelope really works.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's one of those things. But when water intrusion is identified, the biggest thing I can recommend is to realize that it's a process. It's not let's call one phone number and get the problem fixed. It's going to be a process. That's why you got to document. You need to know what caused the water intrusion, and you need to get expert advice out there.
And I guess as a manager, as a property manager, I'm not as concerned about the disaster that you talked about, where the holes in the roof and it's obvious because we can identify that. I guess it's a more insidious water intrusion that's occurring when we're not even aware of it.
Right. Yeah, you can come home and you can look at your house or your building or your condo or your townhouse, and you can see red colors leaching out from the building, and you say that doesn't quite look right. I'm not sure what's causing that.
That's right.
Now that's on Judy's unit or whoever, but I don't see water inside their unit. But why is there red rust leaking out of my building?
That's right, and that's where someone would call you in to take a look at this.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about how we would prevent water intrusion from happening in the first place. It seems like the key to this is to be proactive as opposed to reactive.
Absolutely. The biggest recommendation I can make is to develop a relationship with an engineer architect before there's problems. Having a relationship in place benefits you in multiple manners, and one of them would be, for example, when a hurricane does come through and there's problems, you've already got somebody who's familiar with the building. They've probably got plans of the building in their office, and they're on a first name basis with you, and they can come out right after that and start helping you and working with you and your attorney, and that's kind of one example. But if somebody has an intimate relationship with your building and they understand how the building is put together, and they've looked at the plans, then they can help you through all your projects, your roofing project. Maybe you don't want to hire them to actually manage and oversee an entire roofing project. Maybe the roofing project just doesn't justify that expense. It's not a big roof, let's say. But still, give them a call and get an opinion. We're looking at these technologies, these roofing technologies. What do you think about them? I prefer to put that roofing technology out to bid for you.
Right.
But a lot of times I am utilized in that manner. They don't see the need for the engineer's expense, but they do want my opinion. Go and get the opinions, develop that relationship. The second thing I would recommend is to not let the contractor prepare the solution. And it's no knock against contractors. There are plenty of excellent contractors that do excellent work in this industry, absolutely. But you have to look at things from the perspective of the contractor. Contractors know that when they bid on projects for condos and homeowner associations, more often than not, it's the low bid that wins.
Sure, absolutely.
So if he thinks that you should have X, Y, and Z, but he's pretty sure that everybody else is only going to be bidding X and Y, he's going to bid X and Y.
So you need to be there first to develop that scope so everybody's bidding on the same thing.
Correct. And that common phrase is that apples to apples bidding. You want to make sure everybody's bidding the exact same scope of work, and that the scope of work has actually been prepared by a third-party expert that has your interest in mind. And once you do that, then all of a sudden you'll realize that you feel really good about the bids that you got, and you'll feel good about choosing the low bid.
Sure.
Because they're all going to be held to the same standard, and that they're all bidding the exact same materials, products, everything.
Otherwise, it's a crapshoot. You don't know exactly what you're going to be getting.
Yeah, you got it. As far as routine type of things that we recommend for buildings is getting those condition surveys done. More often than not, we're called out to do a condition survey of the envelope of the building when the association already knows that they need to have the building restored or they need to have that roof replaced. And
the stucco's already falling off in their
Yeah, you've already got the red rust coming out. You've already got 18 of the 42 units are leaking, and okay. So then I'm coming out. I still have to do a condition survey because I still have to figure out what's going on, and that's what the condition survey does. Condition surveys are almost never used as a preventative measure. to have a condition survey done before there's problems. But I can't recommend that enough. Condition surveys are relatively inexpensive in the grand scheme of things, and they can be used to give you a very clear picture of your building, and they can be used to also determine, what's the useful life of this and what's the useful life of that.
For budget purposes, that would be invaluable.
Well, yeah, and speaking of budget purposes, there are also a few engineering firms, Consult Engineering is one of them, that actually provides reserve studies. And having an engineer that actually does and manages projects do the reserve study for an association can help a lot of times, because you get realistic construction costs that you're baking into your reserve funds, and then you're also getting realistic useful lives on the building envelope, waterproofing membranes, windows, things of that nature, the roof. You're getting realistic remaining useful lives, because you'll get that. You're basically getting that condition survey for free.
Excellent. Good. And then what about recording the details about the water intrusion occurrences? I mean, don't we need to put together sort of a history of what's been happening too, don't we?
Absolutely. One of the big things we talked about the association making sure that they record. Every document everything, create those lists, create those diagrams of which units are leaking. The reason why is because even professionals that deal in this all the time can possibly miss some element, or we're not sure if some element of the building envelope, maybe we're a little unsure. Well, is it actually the windows? Because see, a good example is leaking around windows. How do you know if it's just the bad caulking around the window, or how do you know if it's the window itself?
Absolutely.
Now, you can do really expensive tests, or the real simple thing to do is to go ahead and move forward with probably the project you already have budgeted, for the next couple of months, move forward with that project, do the sealants, and do everything that the engineer recommends. And then in the subsequent year, the year after, or the months after, or the next year, you can kind of compare your pre-restoration documentation to see, well, are we still getting leaks at these units? And is it still a problem that's occurring? Was it actually addressed? You can't tell if anything's actually been addressed if you don't have the history.
Exactly. And of course, I assume if people bring you in early enough, if a board brings you in early enough, you're going to help them put together that history so that they have it.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tell our listeners again how they get a hold of you in particular, and let us know.
Sure. You can contact Consult Engineering at 941-206-3000. And we do free proposals from all the way from Bradenton down to Marco Island. So we service the whole Southwest Florida coast. And you can also contact us on the internet at consultengineering.com, or you can email us at office@consultengineering.com.
So boards can get a hold of you, have you sit down at a board meeting with them and discuss what their options are and give them an initial evaluation.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Great. Well, we appreciate you joining us here on the boardroom. A technical topic, but I think we covered it well. My name is Traver Lutz, and this is the boardroom. Every Saturday, here with you with professionals in the field of HOAs and condominiums. And today was no different with Josh Porter. And we look forward to seeing you next week.